Hey guys, welcome back to another Warframe video and continuing my series with lore behind the frame. Today we'll be covering Titania and Oberon. However, I couldn't fit everything that needed to be said in one video, so I'm gonna have to break it down into two. So you know that Oberon and Titania are like the rulers of a Fey kingdom, right? But then that begs the question, what the fuck is a fairy, right? Because you think you know what a fairy is. Everybody thinks they know what a fairy is. However, it's probably not what you think it is. So I have to let me first explain the lore of fairies really as quickly as I can, and then we'll go into other stuff. So first, where exactly is this fairy kingdom, right? It's actually on our world, but in a parallel dimension of our world, like, you know, a flip side, alternate dimension. It's the best way I can describe it. However, there are sacred places, important locations to them in our world, and sometimes under specific circumstances or times, or even to specific types of people, the veil kind of blends and these two worlds merge together, creating like a bridgeway. So you, as a human, can then cross into their realm of reality if you wanted to. They, however, can come into our realm of reality whenever the hell they feel like it. And why would anyone choose to go into their realm of reality? Well, maybe modern day people would think, oh, it's a good idea. But in the past, no one really wanted to do that. They would have been terrified. You see, because our modern view is not correct to the way that it used to be, but I'll get into that later. First, I want to explain. You may think that it looks pretty there, it's beautiful, whatever. It's like, it kind of is, but the best way I can describe it to you is it's supposed to be like an innocent child's dreamland, right? That's what it looks like. But it's also like a psychopath's daydream. And you may be like, what are you talking about? You're talking about like somewhere in between? No. I'm talking about at the same time. That's the best way I could describe what it's like there. It is dangerous there. It is beautiful there, but it is dangerous there. It's dreadful there. You could get magical abilities just being there. However, if you manage to survive, you notice how I said survive, and get out of there, you would likely not even retain your own memories of the events that transpire there, or even the place. You won't know where you were if you manage to get out of there in one piece. So modern day people probably would think that fairies are cute and innocent and helpless, and you would approach them if you saw one. But in the old world, nobody would have ever done that. That is stupid. Fae, I'm gonna call them Fae from now on. They are extremely territorial to these sacred locations. They're shy, but they are also very dangerous. The best way I could describe them to you, like, you have to take your whole image of what a fairy is, a fae is, out of your head and think about it like, if you saw a pack of wild wolves, as beautiful as they are, you're not gonna run up to them and be like, oh, puppy, and touch them. You would not do that shit, right? So why would you think you can do something similar to a fae? Just picture, all right, not even a wolf. Picture you saw a crashed alien spaceship in the woods, and there's aliens out there. Are you gonna go up to them and like touch them and try to catch them? No, you would not do that. Maybe you would try to make contact, but most people will be scared shitless and run away because the danger outweighs the curiosity in their mind. In the old world, people knew better because they had the original image of what these things were like compared to the altered version we have today. So they knew better than to disrespect them or disrespect the locations that they considered sacred, because they knew that you would get like their merciless wrath put upon you, and they did not want that. Even today, you would see in some places, they would, like, if there's a road and there's like supposedly a fairy sighting or something, sometimes they would go around and leave, not even cross to that area, or you wouldn't even fuck with these locations like fairy rings. You just leave it alone, perhaps out of tradition, perhaps because of respect. Kind of like if there's a Native American burial site, you don't just go trampling through it. That's super disrespectful. So you may be thinking maybe it's a good fairy, not a dark fairy or whatever. No, You see, you're falling for the modern idea of Fae. What you have to understand is before Christianity came along and altered this belief system, there is no light and dark. Okay, that wasn't a thing. Fae aren't good or evil kind of thing. It's just that when Christianity came along, they started to box everything and like, look, you follow our way, you're light, you're beautiful. You don't, you're ugly, you're dark. Fae weren't like this. They weren't good or evil. They just did their own thing. Like they didn't exist to fuck with humans, to grant us wishes or do favors for us or torment us and do dumb shit. That's not what they exist for. They don't actually really interact with us. They actually don't really give a shit about us at all. They just do their own thing. And sometimes, once in a blue moon, they would come across a human. And it just depends on their mood, your level of respect, and, you know, just circumstance. Just like an animal, like you're running across an animal in the wild, what are they gonna do? Depends on their mood, depends on how you're reacting to the situation. Depends on, are they hungry as well, right? Like a lot of things come into this equation. It's not just as simple as good and evil. That doesn't really exist. So I'm gonna circle back to this in a second. I just wanna interject this really quick, which is, you may be thinking that like the whole Fae thing is very queer and stuff like that, and lots of people probably think that. Well, you're actually not wrong. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. It actually is like this. It is backwards to the idea that was pushed upon the modern world. You know, back in the old days, people didn't care about this. Like the first tale, the first story that we have written down of like Gilgamesh and stuff like that, guess what? He was gay. Okay, his lover was a man, just for the record. Enkidu was a guy. He was a very powerful guy, and Gilgamesh was a guy. They were gay. Like, it's okay. In the past, no one really cared about this stuff. It was just the way. They didn't even have a word for gay. It was just okay to do this stuff. It's not till Christianity rolled along that they started to impose all these beliefs like, that's wrong, this is wrong, that's bad, this is good. Before that, it was just being. There wasn't even titles for this stuff. There was no word for gay or queer. So the Fae, they were actually backwards to how we modernly do things in our society, which is the males were seen as very beautiful and they were passive. Today they would be considered feminine, but back then they were just themselves. And the female Fae, they were seen as fierce, warrior-like, and dominant, which today you would probably consider that male. But back then it was the opposite way around. That's just the way it was back then. It's just, like I said, Christianity rolled along, and this is how our society became to be now. It could have easily been another way. Another thing is, you may be thinking there was a fairy king. Oberon writes, there was also fairy queens. And back then, the fairy queen was talked about and noted more in lore and in texts and in the stories, way more than the fairy king was talked about, because she was more important. So I don't really want to keep talking about Christianity, like at all, ever. However, in this case, I have to, because it is important context. So all that stuff I just said about how the Fae are, right? This annoyed Christianity and the Christians. They were like trying to push this narrative upon the people of this land, right? So they had to demonize this, because it was so against their ways. Like women having independence and power, authority, control, you know, like even having say over their own lives and body and sexuality and voices, even, you know, like this was too much. This was too much for them. This was the same reason that witches were turned on. And it's not only that, it's that also like people of the time kept turning to the deities, to the Fae, to the witches for their needs, for their help when they were sick or something like that. Anything they needed, it was, I'm gonna go to the wise women, I'm gonna go to the cunning elders, I'm gonna go try to leave an offering to the Fae or to the deities. They would always turn to what they had always done for centuries before Christianity had even existed. This was the way of that they were going to keep doing things. This was an annoyance for Christianity because they needed people to rely on them, to give them money, to follow their ways, to be subservient to them. They needed to monopolize this. That means they needed to persecute, destroy, and demonize, turning everything that wasn't controlled by them to being demonic, dark, black, evil, ugly, lesser, and therefore not worthy of life, remorse, or even worship. So moving forward a bit in time, in the Victorian era, the world was changing so fast and it was becoming so different. A lot of people feared, the old ways being forgotten. So a lot of people actually started to romanticize the past, the old ways, including the old lore and, religions or mythologies, if you want to consider it that. So there became this thing called a folklorist. And it wasn't some obscure thing where like some odd person like X-Files went around doing this. No, it was like a prestigious thing. You went to school for this. Like this was a noble thing, right? And what you did is you would go around from town to town or the old villages and try to get all of the old lore, all of the old stories told by the elders that were passed down for generations, and write it down. However, this turned into fairy tales, tales of the Fae. The people of the time thought it would be a good idea to tell these stories to children. Despite many of these stories being about, betrayals, kidnapping, murder, rape, cannibalism, seduction, and many other concepts that kids today, we do not believe the kids today should be exposed to even the idea of these concepts. Which is why by the time we got to this modern era, these stories got watered down so much that they are appropriate for today's children. But them being watered down in themselves means they are not the original tales. However, there was another group of people which really fascinates me, because these people started to try to find scientific explanations and theories as to like how can they be and what are they if they are even real. So some Christians, but they knew the old tradition, they tried to piece together what this could be, and they were like, well, these creatures, are they angels, right? But if they're angels, they're not really purely good, so they don't belong in heaven, but they're not purely evil, so they don't belong in hell. So they're like neutral angels that like are only on earth, and that's what some people thought. Other Christians, like evangelicals and stuff like that, thought this, which was a strong belief, and it's still what most people believe today, which is if they're not in heaven, all supernatural creatures that are not in heaven, counting ghosts and anything, if they're not in heaven, they are demons, they are demonic. Anything you encounter, if you play with a Ouija board, that's not your grandma talking to you, that is a demon. If you saw a leprechaun, that's a demon. Everything supernatural that is not in heaven, to them is considered demonic. There were others who theorized that every supernatural creature falls into an elemental category, and therefore elementals are a thing. And Fae had fallen into the air category of elementals. Others playing with this idea, but then they branched off to their own theory, was that the Fae would not be air elementals, they would be more earth spirits. And this is what most modern people think about as fairies, because then this image started to grow out of this, which is like, well, they must be smaller because they have to hide in these little hidey holes and like tree stumps and under rocks and stuff like that. So this whole image started to become of it, and it was that they manipulated flowers and earth and vines, and it was more naturey. This is the modern image that people have of the Fae, that they're just pixies and stuff like that. But Fae is not just one thing. Fae is a whole categorization of a lot of things. Yeah, pixies are in there, so are dwarves and elves and other stuff. It just means, like, I guess it would mean magic folk, right? Like, it's just a whole big thing. They're not all one thing. They don't all have one look or one image and one stereotypical. A goblin is a Fae, for crying out loud. However, the word goblin, that's a racial slur, because a goblin isn't a creature in itself. A goblin just means an ugly Fae. So it could be any type of fae. As long as you're ugly and you're a fae, you could be called a goblin, but that's super disrespectful. Anyway, there's more beliefs that people theorize upon. This one I find most interesting because when I was a child, I had come to this conclusion myself and this belief. Whether it's true or not, this is what I believe. And it's that the ancestral spirits are the fae. All the fae that exist, all supernatural creatures that exist, are actually, in truth, just ancient, you know, humans, spirits, ghosts, the dead remnants of ancient people or current people, but they wouldn't be as powerful because they had just recently died, so they don't know how to manipulate the spiritual world yet. But the older ones, the wiser ones, would probably be pretty powerful in this, right? And they would look more like a deity, which is my conclusion, and it's pretty much what they had theorized as well, without me even knowing that people had theorized, so I found that pretty interesting. Another theory that some of them had put forth was that perhaps the Fae were just another race of humankind, which is completely possible. I'm not implying that another human-like race, but Fae are running around our planet today, hiding places. That's not what I'm saying. However, I am implying perhaps our ancestors came across another species of humanoids, and it was so monumental to them that that story has been passed down over the ages constantly to this day. And if you don't think that's even possible, you have to know that in our history, our ancestors did say things like the giants were here before us, red-headed giants and stuff like that. And there was hobbits, and there were dwarves, and all kind of other stuff. And as time went on, we realized that the Nisovins exist, and Neanderthals, and Floridiescens, and there's probably a bunch of other stuff that we're not even aware of yet, if we will ever be aware of them, because perhaps they weren't fossilized correctly to leave a trace of themselves. But there is a problem with this. The problem is that they're just assuming that it's just that they are just one type, they have just one image, when there's a whole big spectrum of different types. They're not just of one thing. Maybe, or unless they're implying like just elves exist or something like that, and just the elves might have been an ancient species, perhaps. One other theory that I've never heard, but I imagine that somebody put it out there at some point somewhere, probably like ancient aliens. They would imply that perhaps the Fae are aliens. I'm just gonna put it out there. But I don't think that's the case either. It doesn't match what lore actually says, just saying. Anyway, that's it for the lore section of this. I'm gonna move on to the next video of Oberon and Titania, and how do they compare to all of this. So thanks for watching, guys, and see you next time.